Good morning and welcome. Welcome to friends and members of the Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church, as well as visitors to our online Sunday morning worship service. I am Reverend Amy Moses Lagos, and it is my privilege to serve as the minister at Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church. I use the pronouns she and her. I am recording this message on Friday, January 8th of 2021 to be shown as part of the service for Sunday, January 10th. Last Wednesday, there was an incredibly shocking, violent overtaking of the United States Capitol building in Washington, D.C., incited by the President of the United States. It happened while United States senators and representatives were gathering to tally the official count of electoral votes for the presidential election. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold democracy to be a sacred value. We covenant to affirm and promote our fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. I am so angry and outraged about this attempted insurrection because it is an attack on a value that I hold so close to my heart, just as I hold all of our Unitarian Universalist principles close to my heart. Wednesday's events were also painful because there was such a clear double standard in how law enforcement officials responded to a group of right-wing violent agitators compared to how they responded to peaceful protesters in the Black Lives Matter movement. When participants in the Black Lives Matter movement held peaceful protests in Washington, D.C. last summer, they encountered a strong, large, organized police force. But last Wednesday, the predominantly white agitators were met by a weak and ineffective police force. This is an example of how racism and white supremacy operate and cause harm in our society. The work of dismantling white supremacy is ongoing, and I want to encourage you to continue in your efforts as a faith community to learn about how racism operates in our society and how we can work for racial justice together. I'm still struggling to process and understand what happened on Wednesday and what's going to happen now. I'm feeling pretty dazed and unsure of what this means and how we can respond. I want you to know that I am with you in pain, in anger, and confusion. I am with you if you are experiencing a response of fight, flight, or freeze. There is space in our community to hold all that you are feeling. I have faith in our congregations to be places where we listen to one another, support one another, and that these things can help bring healing and wholeness where our hearts have been wounded. I am sending you my love and compassion wherever you are in your emotional journey in response to the events of the wider world. May you feel the love of this community holding you, and may you feel held in the love of our Unitarian Universalist faith. May it be so. Amen.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I hope you are well today, wherever you are and however you are joining us. Welcome to today's virtual worship service at Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church. You may notice we have no walls here, no chairs, and sadly no food or drink, but we do have plenty of love, warmth, and camaraderie to share, no matter the distance between us. I hope you'll join us and share in the spirit that drives us forward in these challenging times. If this is your first time with us, welcome. We hope you'll take some time to learn more about our church at bbuuc.org. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism, you can learn more about it at the Unitarian Universalist Association website at uua.org. If you've been with us for a while, we are glad to have you here again. It's a new day. Let us share it together. For the wonder and inspiration we seek from the sun and stars and all the lights of the heavens, we light this chalice.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Wonder Box. Have you ever thought about the name Wonder Box? A box that is full of wonder? Our Wonder Box shares with us stories and lessons about our faith and what it means to be human. And when we open it and allow what's inside to expand, outside the perimeter of the box, we begin to see and think out of the box. Do you ever wonder why I ask you to guess what's inside? I ask because your imagination and creativity are so much bigger than anything that could ever be in this box. And the possibilities are only restricted by how far we let our creativity and imagination fly. And speaking of flying, I want to share a poem with you called I Wave Goodbye When Butter Flies by Jack Perlutsky. I wonder if, as you listen, if you can hear out-of-the-box creativity and a new or different way of seeing the world. I wave goodbye when butter flies and cheer a boxing match. I've often watched my pillow fight and I've sewn a cabbage patch. I like to dance at basketballs or lead a rubber band. I've marveled at spelling bee. I've helped a peanut stand. It's possible a pencil points, but does a lemon drop? Does coffee break or chocolate kiss? And will a soda pop? I share my milk with drinking straws, my meals with chewing gum. And should I see my pocket change, I'll hear my kettle drum. It makes me sad when lettuce leaves. Bye. I laugh when dinner rolls. I wonder if the kitchen sinks. And does a salad bowl? I've listened to a diamond ring, ring, ring. I've waved a football fan. And if a chimney sweeps the floor, I'm sure the garbage can. I love the way the poet invites us to see the world differently, for seeing outside the box of normal. Our faith asks us to use our reason to question what is and imagine new ways to think about things. It's part of our fifth UU source. Heed the guidance of reason and the results of science. We need both imagination and reason to understand the world, to imagine, to invent, or create new things. I wonder, what ways does our faith call you to think outside of the box? How can you be creative today? And with this, our lesson is told. Until the next time.
Words from T.S. Eliot. The eagle soars in the summit of heaven. The hunter with his dogs pursues his circuit. O perpetual revolution of configured stars, O perpetual recurrence of determined seasons, O world of spring and autumn, birth and dying, the endless cycle of idea and action, endless innovation, endless experiment brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness, knowledge of speech, but not of silence, knowledge of words and ignorance of the word. All our knowledge brings us nearer to our ignorance. All our ignorance brings us nearer to death. But nearness to death, no nearer to God. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? The cycles of heaven in 20 centuries bring us farther from God and nearer to the dust. Now is the time in our service when we offer our joys and our sorrows to one another, because joys shared can be magnified and sorrows shared can be lessened. We light a flame for Lucy W., who came home last week after a 2-day post-op stay. What a remarkably resilient lady. Here is to her in continued healing. We light a flame for Cindy's husband, Pete J., who had a minor surgery on his hand, which will keep him from tinkering on his cars and playing piano for 8 weeks. The surgery went great, but will be a challenging 8 weeks in their household. A flame of joy for Cindy J. and all our other members who have received their COVID vaccines. We light a flame of sorrow for Don C., who lost his 100-year-old mother, Doris Poe, sometime between the night of January 1st and the morning of the 2nd in Richmond, Virginia. She had tested positive for COVID prior to her passing. She had spent New Year's Eve at the hospital and then returned to her assisted living facility under hospice care the next day, where she passed in her sleep. Graveside services were held for immediate family last Wednesday in Deep Creek, Virginia. Due to COVID, Don, Judy, and their family are unable to attend, but look forward to a remembrance of life service with family and old friends once it is safe. We light a flame of concern for Joanne C.'s sister, Franny, who as of January 4th is hospitalized with COVID-19. She had been intubated and on a vent for 6 days as of that date. Please keep her in your prayers. We light a candle of concern for Ted C., who has cancer in his left lung. His wife, Dixie, shared that the cancer is a spread of the bladder cancer for which he was treated last year. Unfortunately, due to its origin and pathology, it is not curable. However, there is a treatment that is intended to prevent the situation from worsening. Ted and Dixie were able to enjoy a recent trip to Arizona to visit with family. Another flame of concern for Stacey A.'s brother-in-law in London, who had a stroke a week before Christmas. He is home now and doing well, but during his hospital stay, several cancerous tumors were discovered in his chest. He is having surgery immediately. Please keep him in your thoughts. We light several remaining flames to celebrate our special birthdays and anniversaries in the coming week. A candle for Debbie J., whose birthday is today, January 10th. Celebrations follow on the 11th with Bonnie M. and on the 12th with Ed S. A final birthday flame for Cassidy D., whose special day is on the 16th. We light 3 flames in honor of anniversaries this week, with Donna Z. and Cindy D. happily celebrating 23 years together today on the 10th. Linda and Barry M. will celebrate their marriage on January 15th, when they were joined in love at BBUUC 27 years ago. And another for Adam and Michelle D., who celebrate 17 wonderful years of marriage on January 16th. Congratulations to our lovely couples. And we will light one final candle for those joys and concerns that remain unspoken, but still in our hearts.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow, giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end.
What a blessing it is to give and receive, to share and support this church where love, justice, and equality inspire our acts of service and compassion. Our January virtual offerings will go to Feeding Northeast Florida, helping local children and families, seniors, and active and retired military members who struggle to put food on the table. Working with local grocery stores, manufacturers, and farms, they rescue high-quality food that would normally be wasted and transform it into meals for those in need. By connecting millions of pounds of rescued food to a network of over 250 social service agencies and programs like City Rescue Mission, the Salzbacher Center, and the Salvation Army, these hunger relief partners are able to provide not only food to those in need, but services that can help these families and individuals and end the cycle of poverty, including job training or placement, low-cost child care, SNAP benefits, medical care, affordable housing, and counseling. With your help and support, we can make sure one of the most basic needs shared by all of us is met every day. You can donate through the BBUUC PayPal Giving Fund account link on our YouTube channel. Phillip Baber is the pastor of the People's Church of Jacksonville and the regional director of the Poor People's Campaign of Northeast Florida. He is the former pastor of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Jacksonville and has served as co-president of iCare, the Jacksonville-based interfaith coalition for action, reconciliation, and empowerment. Phillip's ministry is dedicated to the advancement of our collective liberation, leading him to advocate in support of criminal justice reform, police accountability, racial and economic justice, justice for refugees and immigrants, and LGBTQIA+ rights. Phillip, welcome to our virtual pulpit.
In another life, many moons ago, I served as a high school English teacher here in Jacksonville. And whatever level class I taught, whether advanced placement literature to seniors or remedial reading to freshmen, I always emphasized the study of poetry. I required my students to analyze a poem every day. It was the first thing they did when they walked through my classroom door. Now, inevitably, at the beginning of every year, when I informed my students that poetry was going to be an area of focus in my class, the kids would all exhale in relief. It's because they believed that this was good news. Turns out all my students believed that poetry was easy. Now, part of the reason for this delusion was that they felt a certain deceptive sense of familiarity when it came to poetry. Like all of us, my students had been exposed to poetry at an early age through nursery rhymes and children's books, and many of my students were already writing poems in their personal diaries and journals, so most of these teenagers thought that they had already mastered the art of poetics. But that was only part of the problem. The bigger issue I discovered was that my students believed studying poetry would be easy because poems are short. Poems are way shorter than stories or novels, so that means they must require less work to analyze or create. I mean, this is the kind of stuff my students told me explicitly. So I responded by sharing the sentiments of French philosopher Blaise Pascal, who in 1657 wrote in an epistle, "I have made this letter longer than usual because I did not have time to make it shorter." Now, this simply resulted in greater confusion and consternation from my students. So to further explain the demanding, exacting nature of poetics, I related an anecdote about Oscar Wilde, who reportedly once spent an entire morning deciding to remove a comma from one of his poems, and then spent the entire afternoon deciding to put the comma back. The point is that poetry, both its writing and analysis, is deceptively difficult. It requires immense effort and thought and focus. Writing poetry, crafting poetry, is an act of creation. The word poem itself comes from the Greek infinitive poein, which means to make or create. So creating a poem is like creating life. Like all births, it starts with conception. In this case, the conception of an idea. That idea and its expression, because an idea cannot be disentangled from its expression. It gestates over time in the mind and in the heart. And after that period of gestation, when the idea is ready to burst forth, there is a process of labor. The poet toils over every stanza, every clause, every word, every comma. Finally, the poem is expelled. The poem takes its first independent breath and thus becomes a separate entity with a life all its own. Now, the analysis of poetry is no less intense. The reader's interaction with a poem is a form of engagement. There is an interplay between the text and the reader, and each party, text and reader, itself is the product of countless other previous interplays and engagements. There are several different metaphors we could apply to this mutual engagement between reader and text. We could call it a dialogue, a conversation. We could call it a wrestling match, a violent battle. We could call it a most intimate form of intercourse. In my own study of poetry, I've come to the conclusion that many of the same principles one uses to write and read good poetry could also be generally applied to the act of living. So what would it mean to live poetically? First, I'd like to note that the idea of living poetically suggests and presumes that it is possible to live unpoetically. I suppose we might call this living prosaically, since prose is the language of the mundane and the everyday. So before we can wrestle with the question of what does poetic living look like, we should probably first acknowledge this foundational question. What, if anything, is the difference between prose and poetry? Now, this seemingly simple question is actually insidiously complex, and whatever answer you choose will be profoundly consequential, because it's not merely a question of literature and linguistics. It's also a question of philosophy and theology. Asking what, if anything, is the difference between prose and poetry leads to a theologically parallel corollary. What, if anything, is the difference between the sacred and the profane? And our individual answers to that question will in many ways dictate the manner in which we all interface with creation. This big question is so important that I'm not going to profane it by suggesting an answer. Instead, for our purposes today, I'm simply going to presume that there is indeed a distinction between prose and poetry, and now I'm just going to offer you 5 principles that I personally have found to be useful in the writing and in the analysis of poetry, which I believe will be equally useful in living a poetic life, however you might choose to define that term. So the first principle, learn the rules and how to work within them. Every language operates by a set of rules, a grammar. Now, poetry, and especially classical poetry, in addition to these general rules of language, often imposes additional rules. A Shakespearean sonnet, for example, must be comprised of 14 lines of iambic pentameter verse divided into 3 quatrains of alternating rhymes, ending with a final rhyming couplet that summarizes or re-examines the theme with an insightful, unexpected turn, or volta. Why so many rules? Well, that's a good question, and it has many answers. Here's just one. Seeing someone work masterfully within self-imposed limitations can be an extraordinarily beautiful thing. The art of poetry begins with learning the rules and learning how to work masterfully within them. Like language and poetry, life is full of rules. Divine commandments, secular laws, moral codes, cultural norms, rules of etiquette. In poetry, as in life, I think it's a good idea first to learn the rules and how to maneuver within them as gracefully and intentionally as possible. Then and only then are you ready for my second principle. Number 2, Once you understand the rules and have mastered them, break them. In poetry, like all art, once one understands the rules, once one understands the patterns and the way those patterns create expectations within an audience, skillful artists can bend or break those rules and patterns to create innovative and surprising effects. Poets, like all artists, can use their art to break through imposed boundaries to explore new ideas, new worlds we have yet to even imagine. Shakespeare and Milton and Keats must give way eventually to Eliot and Cummings and Kerouac. So too in life, we celebrate rule breakers. Historians often divide the ages by the lives of rule breakers. Rosa Parks, Susan B. Anthony, Martin Luther, Jesus of Nazareth. Our veneration of historic rule breakers should remind us that there is a time and a place to resist, oppose, break, and completely dismantle certain rules, rules that, at the time, surely must have seemed good and useful to the majority of people living under them. Principle number 3, mind and savor the details. Here in the information age, we are oversaturated with text. Each of us reads an enormous amount of text every day, whether it's traditional newspapers and books or the internet, falling down a Wikipedia hole, looking at cat memes on Facebook, or deciphering emojis sent via text message. We all read a lot. But what we today call reading is often nothing more than scanning and sifting and filtering vast amounts of text in search of relatively small bits of desirable information. Through this process of modern reading, we end up discarding far more text than we actually ingest. Now, poetry defies this process. You cannot read a poem the way you read your Facebook or Twitter feed. If our regular modern mode of reading is like sitting down at an all-you-can-eat buffet, then reading poetry is like participating in a Japanese tea ceremony. In reading poetry, words and phrases, images and ideas, even punctuation, the pauses, the sounds, the feel of the words in your mouth, all of it must be savored. So living poetically means savoring the details. Living poetically means practicing mindfulness and presence and intention, living in awareness and gratitude for the smallest of details, the smell of fresh rain, the warmth of the sun on your bare forearms, the ridiculously irrational melange of colors in a sunset, the sound and timbre of a child's laughter, the feel of your lover's flesh under your fingertips. To live poetically is to savor life. Number 4, be comfortable with ambiguity. Many of us believe that the purpose of language is to transmit the exact thoughts of a speaker so that they are understood without any distortion by a listener. Now, this theory of language prizes clarity and precision and efficiency above all. This type of language is the vernacular of science and law, where words are tightly controlled and meant to have one and only one definition. Author and UCC minister Michael Dowd has dubbed this kind of language day language because it attempts to be transparent, clear, fully visible as something would be in the sunlight. But there is another kind of language, something Dowd calls night language. In this language, words, phrases, and images have a multiplicity of possible meanings and possible interpretations. Night language is not intended to be clear and precise. Night language revels in ambiguity and imagination and interpretation and possibility. In many ways, it functions like a Rorschach or an inkblot test, an ambiguous symbol upon which the reader or hearer is invited to project and co-create meaning. Night language is the vernacular of poetry and religion, particularly mysticism. Writing and reading poetically means looking at words with an expectation that a multiplicity of meanings is possible. It eschews certainty and authoritative interpretations. Living poetically means embracing the ambiguity and the paradoxes inherent to life. It means accepting the limitations of our knowledge and perception. It means seeing reality as pregnant to the point of bursting with multiple, different, valid meanings. It means rejecting the fundamentalism of objectivity, which argues for a single capital T truth, and it means recognizing the danger of excessive self-reliance, because in the dark, we all need each other more than ever. Fifth, always look closer. In my English classes, I always told my students, if the end of your analysis of a poem is a simple, straightforward answer, be afraid, because it probably means you didn't look close enough. See, there will always be a superficial layer. Its ease and comfort will tempt you to end your journey prematurely. Full, deep analysis requires breaking through the superficial to the real. So too, in living, beware of simple answers, simple explanations, simple interpretations. Look closer, and you might be amazed at the complexity and nuance that you failed to see the first time. Look close enough, and you might enter the quantum realm, where everything you thought you knew and understood, all the rules and presumptions, are turned upside down. And that point right there, that is the exquisitely frightening precipice we must jump on our poetic journey. To question that deeply is immensely risky, immensely dangerous, and therefore requires immense courage, especially when the analysis involves examining yourself. But remember, all analysis of anything in the external world ultimately requires first an analysis and understanding of the self. I believe that my faith calls me to live poetically, to master the rules, to break the rules, to savor the rules, to embrace ambiguity, and to look closer. Earlier, we heard a verse from The Rock in which T.S. Eliot asks us, "Where is the life we have lost in living?" I suppose that my answer is right here, waiting for us. But like the pearl of great price or the Holy Grail, which Eliot knew a little bit about, that life does not come easily. That life requires great work and great sacrifice. But it is our dedication to finding this life that has brought all of us together here. It is the pursuit of this life that binds us together. And truly, it is the heart of faith. Blessed be.
Poetry by Pablo Neruda. And it was at that age poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know where it came from winter or a river. I don't know how or when. No, they were not voices, they were not words, nor silence. But from a street I was summoned, from the branches of night, abruptly from others, among violent fires or returning alone. There I was, without a face, and it touched me. I did not know what to say. My mouth had no way with names, my eyes were blind, and something started in my soul. Fever or forgotten wings, and I made my own way, deciphering that fire, and I wrote the first faint line, faint, without substance, pure nonsense, pure wisdom, of someone who knows nothing. And suddenly I saw the heavens unfastened and open, planets, palpitating plantations, shadow perforated, riddled with arrows, fire, and flowers, the winding night, the universe. And I, infinitesimal being, drunk with the great starry void, likeness, image of mystery, for myself a pure part of the abyss. I wheeled with the stars. My heart broke loose on the wind. As flame is to spirit, so spirit is to breath, and breath to song. Though we extinguish the flame in this sanctuary, may we tend it in our hearts until we meet again.